just by being in pratisvara mode, one cannot learn efficiently. We know that the prefrontal cortex is temporary memory and hippocampus is our permanent memory. Now, using the pratisvara mode, we can tell the brain to recognize that information as important and put that information in the hippocampus to store permanently. Now, as more and more information coming from pratisvara mode is saved in the hippocampus, and as this information becomes larger, we will now have an issue in recalling it or getting back our saved information. For example, if you take a computer, if we create one file, it is okay. But if we create hundreds and thousands of files and if we save it, now to get the right file, now we need to search it between those hundreds of files or thousands of files, and this is now a big headache. Now, if you want your files to be accessed quickly, in our computers, we have to see that we organize these files with proper names, folders, and directories. Similarly, even in our brain, when we are saving this information to hippocampus, we should also take care that it is organized with proper nomenclature, folders, and directories. In case of our operating systems, we have a process in it called as indexing. And during this process, all files in the computer will be indexed so that in the search bar, when we type the name of the file, the computer based on this indexed information searches it faster and gives it back to us. So now, when we save our important information, we have to see that these files, before they are saved, are indexed and saved with proper names and folders, so that then to search it or to recall it, it becomes easy. In Windows, Mac OS or Ubuntu, the computer has an automated indexing system which will index all files and then adds a tag, so that when we need to find a file, if we just search the name in the search window, it quickly searches and gives it back to us. Similar to the computers, our brain also has an automated indexing system to index all information so that when we want to recall it later, it can be called quickly. But when our brain does the indexing of this information we collected in pratisvara mode, during this indexing time, the brain should not be asked to save or write any new information. Until the brain does the complete indexing, we should never send brain any additional information. So now, we in pratisvara mode, say for example, we grab some information for 20 minutes. Now this information needs to be indexed and saved to hippocampus to make it recall easier. So now, for our brain to do indexing, all we need to do is, we have to keep our brain free from the five senses and its information. So this state of disconnecting the brain from its five senses for a while to make it index and memorize the given information from pratisvara is what we call as Paryaasa. Now let us also see how the brain does this indexing. Well, for this, let us have a look at a neuron cell. What you are seeing here is a neuron cell. It has a nucleus at the top, the axon and the axon terminal. All its function we will understand in detail in our next section. But now here to briefly understand it, in pratisvara mode, the information that we grab from our concentrated sense organ is now stored in millions of such neurons. Now, after being in pratisvara mode for 20 minutes and then when we move to the Paryaasa mode, we stop recording of any more new information, and during this time, our brain will establish a kind of relationship between all these neurons that was collected in this first 20 minutes of learning. These relationships are established in the form of a thin myelin sheet that will be formed on this long tail that is running between the axon and the axon terminal. So now the information collected in that particular session of pratisvara for 20 minutes are all interconnected and indexed with this myelin sheets. So according to the scientific research, the time taken by brain to do this process is about 15 to 20% of time it was in pratisvara mode to grab that action. So, for example, if we have collected information in pratisvara mode for 20 minutes, then for the next 5 minutes, we have to leave our brain in a state called Paryaasa mode, where no new information is fed to brain. And during this time, the brain then establishes strong neural connections and make indexing to later recall this information faster. So this process of Paryaasa is just opposite to pratisvara. In pratisvara, all our attention was given to one single sense or information to grab and store it. But in Paryaasa, we are totally defocused and we have to disconnect our brain from what we are seeing, hearing, eating, smelling and all other things. Now our mind should be in a state of nirvana, meaning that we are just floating around in air, not focusing on anything. This kind of state of mind is also called as defocused or diffuse mode. The best activities that we can do in this defocus mode is to go for a walk in nature. Enjoy some good fresh air. Just sit at one place, close your eyes and never think anything, but just stay calm and still. Another best example for Paryaasa mode is to fall asleep. So now from all these scientific studies which has been carried out very recently, till just a couple of years back, the best learning system is a system where we will remain in pratisvara mode for 20 minutes, focused fully on just one information or one sense. Then after 20 minutes, we have to then enter into a state of Paryaasa where we are totally defocused, not thinking about anything or not concentrating on anything happening around. Being in the state of defocus mode is also not easy. In yoga, this state is called as samadhi, or in asana, we call this as shavasana. Now, some people, what they do is, after 20 minutes of pratisvara focused learning, they move to the relaxed Paryaasa mode, and in this mode, they open their mobile and start to check Facebook, Instagram, watch Insta Reels, and they think they are relaxing. But this does not serve any purpose. Again, when you are seeing this Insta Reels or Facebook feeds, you intermittently enter into pratisvara mode and you give no chance for your brain to create these myelin connections for the information. So remember, Paryaasa means maintaining absolutely no action or not sensing anything. You should not even think, as that will also affect the brain performance in building the myelin sheets. Now from this scientific principle, if we go back to our Mimamsa principle, here this Paryaasa state is defined in a little different way. Here the philosophy is little different. We already know that in Mimamsa, our body is a chariot. It is driven by 5 horses representing 5 senses. And the charioteer or the driver who is driving it is our brain. However, we have one additional player here. And that player is the master or the passenger who is sitting inside the chariot. And that master or the passenger is our mind. Now, according to this Mimamsa theory, the brain will be getting the information and electric impulses from 2 sides. One, from the 5 senses, that is the horses. The other information is the command the brain gets from the mind. Again here, the brain, when it is communicating with the senses, it should not communicate with the mind. When it is communicating with the mind, it should not communicate with the senses. It cannot do both. To understand this better, let us take a real life scenario. Say for example, you have to travel to a particular location and so you will book a Uber taxi. Now as soon as you book the taxi, your communication with the taxi driver starts. You tell him where you are, where you want to go, and getting all this information, the Uber driver reaches your location and picks you up. But once you enter into the car, now the driver will no more communicate with you, but will focus now on the driving and the GPS he has in his front to see that he is on the right route to reach the destination you have booked for. So he is now driving the car and now he is in a heavy traffic. Now suddenly if you start to communicate with the driver midway and start to ask him to take a different route, then the driver now who is stuck in traffic and is following his GPS is now confused about whether to obey you or the GPS route. So in this state of confusion, he may lose his concentration and may end up with an accident. So the best way the driver has to do is when you give him some idea or communicate something in midway of your journey, then before listening to you, he has to first bring his car to a roadside, stop it, concentrate on what you say, listen it carefully, and based on your new commands, he will revert the route. Again, he will resume his journey. Now, in the same scenario, if you take our brain, say for example, our mind decides to learn something new today and tells the brain that he needs to study a chapter in physics for 1 hour. Then the brain gets the book and then once the book is ready, it enters into pratisvara mode and for about 20 minutes, other than reading the book, the sensory organs does no other job, and after 20 minutes of concentrated learning in pratisvara, the brain enters the Paryaasa mode for the next 10 minutes. Now in Mimamsa, what they say is, when the brain is in Paryaasa mode, it will free all its 5 horses, it will disconnect totally from its senses, and the brain will now turn towards your mind, that is the passenger or the master, and the conversation or the communication goes on between the brain and the mind for about 10 minutes. So in this state, the mind and the brain together will decide which all matter is important. The brain will take all the commands to store those information in hippocampus, and then the brain asks the mind to go into a third state in Mimamsa, which is called as the Samadhi mode. In Mimamsa, we have not just 2 states, Pratisvara and Paryaasa. We have a third state called Samadhi. So now, after the conversation between the brain and the mind, what the mind has to do is, it has to take the entire body into Samadhi mode. In this mode, the body will remain just like a dead body in Samadhi with absolutely no interaction with any of the senses. Now, attaining this Samadhi mode needs a lot of practice and skill and is very difficult for most of the learners, and it is almost impossible in today's life for anyone to enter this Samadhi mode. So that's why in our current education system, we are going to stick with this Pratisvara and Paryaasa, the 2 mode of learning. So switching between this Pratisvara and Paryaasa intermittently will make us learn efficiently. So now, based on what we have learned in this lesson, we have a specific pattern of teaching in this new education system. In this pattern, each class, say for example, you have a 1 hour, in it the effective teaching time of every teacher will be 50 minutes. In this 50 minutes, the teacher should first start the class, keeping all the children in Pratisvara mode and start with a fresh subject, and this Pratisvara mode of learning will happen for about 25 minutes. After 25 minutes of Pratisvara mode learning, then the teacher should ask all the children to remain in Paryaasa mode by closing their eyes and just relaxing without doing any action. They should not even think and just be in a calm, relaxed state with eyes closed for 5 minutes. Later, the next 20 minutes will be allotted for the Abhyasana Kriya. We are going to learn in detail about what this Abhyasana Kriya is in our future classes. You might remember that when we went through the 18 concepts of learning in Vignan, we had two concepts. Concept number 13 Atvara Abhyasana and 14 Antarika Abhyasana. Well, in these two sessions, we will discuss about this Abhyasana Kriya, which should go on for about 20 minutes. So now in today's session, I think you are now familiar with pratisvara and Paryaasa mode of learning. To be an efficient learner, the learner should first with full concentration, blocking all the other senses, has to remain in pratisvara mode for 80% of time, and once the information is grasped in this mode, later the remaining 20% time, the learner has to switch to Paryaasa mode, where he will completely disconnect all his senses from brain, remain calm and relaxed, and allow the brain to build the myelin sheath network. This process can be repeated for the specified learning duration. So this completes our discussion on this most important concept of learning, which is pratisvara Paryaasa. So now in our next session, we will be discussing about the second concept in this Vignan stage, which is Nidravastha. So we will see in our next session. Bye.